So my name is Suzi Bewell, and a big thank you to Languagenut for inviting me to speak this evening. So with the new GCSE in mind, I'm going to be talking to you a little bit this evening about dictation. And as Elaine said, we've called it the not so new kid on the block because depending on where you were educated, perhaps if you were educated in France, you are probably very familiar with the concept of dictation. But in a sense, it is a new part of what will be expected of us as languages teachers from September of 2024. However, I think a lot of the ideas and resources that I'm going to share with you will not necessarily be that uncommon to you. Some of them might be. And I guess my overall aim for this evening is to just allay any fears, to try and give you an opportunity to see what that might look like in practice. And also to ask any questions that you might have based on the resources that I share. So I am currently head of languages at Cundall Manor School, which is near Thirsk. And I also run my own consultancy, Polyglot Languages, and work alongside Danielle Bourdet on French resources for our little company, Francosphere. So you've got my details there should you want to explore any of my other resources. So with this presentation in mind, I just wanted to say at the very outset that there needs to be credit given to Esmeralda Salgado and Sylvia Basto, who I'm sure many of you will know or have heard of in the world of languages. They have contributed heavily to the content in this session because we worked collaboratively over the summer of 2023 on some resources, and that is kind of the content of today's session. So a big thank you to both of them if they are listening. So what I wanted to do to start with was a kind of overview of changes. So to give you an excellent summary of the new GCSE for languages, which was written by Helen Myers from the Association for Language Learning, the two areas that are of particular interest to you with tonight's webinar in mind will be pages 53 to 7, which specifically reference dictation, and pages 76 to 83, which specifically reference read aloud speaking tasks. And you'll see in the next couple of slides why I think dictation and reading aloud are two very separate concepts, but that are also quite closely linked. So in terms of phonics and dictation, the subject content for French, German and Spanish GCSEs for first teaching from 2024, and obviously first examinations from summer 2026. So the key points to note, if you write nothing else down today, linked to today's webinar, is that in the exam, the students will need to learn to be able to confidently read out loud from a written prompt. So that's something completely new. That's quite alien to what we do currently. Students will be expected to pronounce words with stress patterns that allow their speech to be clear and comprehensible. Now, the way in which they're going to be expected to do this is obviously changed. But actually, if you look carefully at any speaking exam mark scheme, you will see that there is already an emphasis on clear pronunciation, intonation and fluency. So it's taking that just a little bit further. And then students will use their phonic awareness to transcribe what they hear with a good degree of accuracy. So in other words, they will think about the sounds of the words that they hear, and they will use that phonic awareness to write that down. And again, that might fill you with the fear of God, because again, it's something quite new and quite alien to the students. But if you start quite nice and early, maybe even as low down as upper key stage 2, then by the time your students get to that point of taking their first new GCSE, they will be completely au fait with what is expected of them. So I've just put at the bottom there a link to the full document should you have not seen that already. So I wanted to talk about Ofsted. Well, no, I didn't really want to talk about Ofsted, but Ofsted have spoken quite widely about the 3 pillars model of language learning. And again, there's a link there if you want to read that curriculum research review. Basically, I've summarised on this slide what it says into 2 short sentences. The schemes of learning that you have in MFL should share clear logic behind progression in phonics, including when to teach differences between English sound spelling correspondences and those of the target language. And actually, as a department, we are currently reviewing our schemes of work all the way down to year 7. And we're starting to map a bit more clearly and a bit more carefully how we are introducing phonics from year 7. We actually do a little bit lower down the school because we teach primary in my school. And then secondly, there should be evidence in curriculum planning that plan, practice and review of phonemes and how these link to graphemes is happening across key stages. So again, that need to map this onto your documents. It needn't be a huge chore, but if you look at your textbooks and you look at what the key sounds are in any given unit of work, you can just simply add a column to your existing scheme of work and just make it clear that they are the sounds that are going to be the ones that you are stressing in that particular half term or term. Depending on which exam board you are going with, so currently we're with AQA, but we are switching to Edexcel. The exam style questions on the dictation section of the AQA exam are as follows. So for AQA, the dictation exam questions involve 4 short sentences which students must transcribe fully using their knowledge of French sounds. So the instructions you can see on the right hand side, you'll hear 4 short sentences. Listen carefully, using your knowledge of sounds, write down in French exactly what you hear for each sentence. You'll hear each sentence 3 times. The first time is a full sentence, the second time in short sections, and the third time again as a full sentence. Use your knowledge of French sounds and grammar to make sure that what you have written makes sense. Check carefully that your spelling is accurate. And in the higher tier, very similar, but there are going to be 5 short sentences. And you can see on the right hand side there, it just gives that same information again. For Edexcel, however, it's going to involve 3 short sentences with gaps, which students must fill in with what they hear, 1 per gap, and then 2 whole sentences. So that is quite different according to the 2 exam boards. In terms of the instructions, you'll listen to 6 short sentences. For sentences 1 to 3, you must write down the missing words. So the missing words, in a sense, give you a little bit of context to what is missing. So that might be something quite appealing. You might find that a bit more inclusive for your students. For each gap, you must write 1 word in French. And for sentences 4, 5 and 6, they're writing down the whole sentence. So that's pretty much the same as AQA. For the higher tier at Edexcel, there are 2 short sentences with gaps followed by 4 whole sentences. So it just increases the difficulty slightly from foundation to higher. So I hope that makes sense. You may well have seen this, so I may be teaching my granny to suck eggs. But if you haven't had time in the business of school to study what each of the exam boards is suggesting for the exam content, then I think comparing those 2 exam boards side by side is actually quite useful. So what could progression look like in dictation? So I mentioned earlier, the earlier that you start, for us it's going to be in year 7. It may well be in year 6, which is when we start to introduce the Dynamo textbook. So for stage 1, we're talking about low challenge and high support. So for example, that might be a question of focusing on how to write down certain isolated phonemes. So for example, and again, I know this is a common task that we do anyway, perhaps more for writing, I'm going to delete all of the vowels, and the children have got to listen to what I say, and they've got to work out which of the vowels they might have to include. For stage 2, we've called this medium challenge with medium support. Again, once the students have had a good opportunity to get used to the stage 1 activities, perhaps over a term or 2, you might then start to introduce stage 2. It might be that stage 2 actually comes into year 8. So students are transcribing words and short sentences, perhaps with a word bank or a jigsaw grid. So it's not completely from memory or from what they hear. They're actually being given a little bit of support so that it makes it a bit more accessible. For stage 3, we're moving on to high challenge and low support. And I'm going to show you some concrete activities in French, German and Spanish in just a second. So that example might be transcribing a few sentences with limited support, such as the first letters, or provide a part translation or maybe a parallel text. I've done a parallel text just this afternoon, actually. And then for stage 4, which we're calling high challenge, no support, this is transcribing longer texts unaided. So that's very much in line with the expectations of the AQA higher paper, where the children don't get any gaps to fill. It's literally just 6 sentences. So for low challenge, high support, your students are presented with a word or text minus 1 isolated phoneme. So I've got an example at the bottom there in French and 1 in Spanish. They have to listen carefully and fill in the missing grapheme. This could progress over time to incorporate several phonemes. So start with simple, and then perhaps move on to more than 1 missing phoneme. So I would give the students that list of words. I wouldn't indicate that the missing phoneme is obviously E, that's for them to work out. And then I would read out the list of words: souris, igloo, 6, 10, gris, ici, and the students would then have the opportunity to work out from what they hear what is missing. And that could be quite a nice easy starter or a plenary, and something that you could perhaps aim to do once a week or once every couple of weeks, just to get that as part of your routine. As you can see on the right hand side, we've got an example with the h sound in Spanish. Another one for low challenge, high support, we've called this one dictation tick and flick. So the students would be offered a list of words, so it might be the ones at the bottom of the page in Spanish, and they tick what they hear, and you would potentially include some red herrings and words that you don't choose to include from recent topics. So you can make it as challenging or as easy as you like, depending on the learners that you've got in front of you. So I hope that makes sense. Another one for low challenge, high support, snap dictation. So in this activity, the teacher produces a list of words or chunks or short sentences and gives one to every 2 students. They're pairing up. In their pairs, they complete the work with their partners. So they listen to the missing words or chunks or sentences, and they quickly highlight or circle the ones that they hear. And the student who does show the quickest maybe gets a point. In our school, we have house points, or they might get a stamp, whatever it is you use to offer rewards. I think this is the final one on low challenge, high support. So my students are big fans of bingo. They love to play lotto. They play lotto all day long if I let them. So this is just to take on something that they are familiar with, which I think is always quite handy. They know how to play lotto. They know the rules of the game. So in this example, we're obviously giving it a dictation focus. The teacher shows a mosaic of syllables on the board and hands out an empty table to students. So we've got a German example here for the Germanists on the call. Students choose 9 syllables at random, and the teacher keeps reading the syllables, and the students cross the ones off that they have in their table. And the first one to cross off all the boxes sings bingo. So I think that the point here is thinking about variations for the same results. If there is a game that works really, really well with your students, just take a little bit of time out when you're on a sun lounger in Spain over the holidays, or when you're just taking some time out preparing for the new GCSE, whenever that might be, to just think, actually, what really works well with my students, and is there any way that I can just adapt that activity and give it a dictation spin, so that actually it's something that's familiar to my students, but where they can they get the hang of the activity. The only thing that's different is the focus on dictation. So moving on now to medium challenge and medium support. This is called a back-to-back gap fill dictation, and I'm sure that some of you on the call will have already done this at least once or twice. So the back-to-back dictation will contain different gaps in the same shared text. So person A starts and reads up to their first gap, and then person B continues until their next gap, and so on and so on. And they sit back to back so that they can't see their partner's text. Now, obviously, this is relying on the students having a fairly good grasp of pronunciation, because essentially it's also a read aloud task. Person A, who is doing the reading aloud, is going to need to be able to transfer what they read phonetically on the page into spoken French or Spanish or German in a comprehensible way, so that person B can understand what is needed to go in the gap. So I would only really move on to this kind of activity once you're confident, perhaps in year 8 or 9, that your students have got a good solid phonics foundation. Another activity, gap fill from a transcript. Again, I'm all about recycling and reusing. We are all busy teachers. We are time poor. So this could, for example, be taken from the textbook. So what I often do in our active studio, once I've done with my year 10 students a listening activity, using something that is already there and prepared, and I'm sure in the new textbooks when they're finally active and online, we'll have that same functionality of having a transcript that we can actually use without having to produce one of our own. So the gap fill should be no more than a few sentences max. Remember, the exam criteria, even at higher level, is no more than 6 sentences, so we don't want to give them more than what is expected from the exam. And depending on the confidence of your learners, the teacher could offer a range of words in a text box, including some red herrings. So there's a level of support, but the red herrings just make it that little bit more challenging. Delayed dictation. So again, if you are a fan of the EPI methodology, which I know many schools have adopted in recent times, you will have heard of a delayed dictation. So the pupils hear and see a sentence for 10 seconds containing a minimum of 95% comprehensible input. Remember, the words that are unknown to students in the new exam will be glossed. So the teacher tells them to hold it in their heads for 10 seconds before writing it down. And as they do this, you could, if you choose, make funny noises. You could utter random second language words to distract them for a few seconds. Or, as is often my preference, you just have silence. You know your class, so you know what would work best for them. And then finally, you ask them to write the sentences either on their mini whiteboards or in the back of their books, and to show you their answers. So an example of what that might look like is look at the phrase on the board for 10 seconds. Once it's gone, write down what you can remember. So I'm going to also say it out loud to them so that they get to start making that connection, that important connection between sound and spelling. Moving on to high challenge, low support. So this is the next level before they go on to what is expected from the exam. A relay dictation, sometimes also known to as a running dictation, although my classroom isn't big enough to run around, so I think that would be a bit of a health and safety hazard. Maybe we could get in the gym. So several sentences stuck around the classroom on strips of paper. Students work in small groups and compete to finish first. Students take turns to read some or all of a strip. They have to memorize what they see, and they can't read and just shout it out to their group. So you have to establish the rules quite clearly. They appoint a scribe. The scribe then writes what the student dictates, and the pen is then passed, and the next student finds a strip to read and dictate. The winners, if you want to make it competitive, are the group with the most accurate transcription. So I hope that makes sense. Again, just it's an oldie, but it's a goodie. It's one that we probably already do, but we wouldn't necessarily think to put it under the heading of dictation. High challenge, low support, battleships. Now, I hold up my hand. I've never actually played battleships in my entire career, and I feel a bit embarrassed to say that. But it's not really it's not really my style of teaching. I know my colleagues use this as a resource. This is one of the other contributors to the resource that came up with this. Teacher provides a battleship grid and reads words or sentences randomly, and the students write the coordinates of the words that they hear. And if you've got a particularly good group, or they're at a level where they're actually able to read aloud confidently with good pronunciation, you could actually get one of the students to be the teacher in this instance. Fill in the gaps dictation with no gaps. So there's an example at the bottom. The teacher dictates some sentences or a short text. The students get a copy of the text or sentences, and the text has got some missing words but doesn't have gaps. The first time the teacher reads the sentences or text, the students just identify where the gaps should be. So what they could do is just simply put an arrow or a kind of a slash in the text, so they say, actually, that's where there was a missing word. On the second round, the expectation is that the students write the missing words. So you've got normalmente suelo al fútbol con mis amigos, and then you would say it with the correct missing words, and they would work out where the missing words go. And the second time of hearing, they would include the missing words and write those as accurately as possible to show that they are able to make that sound spelling connection. Another German example next. This is called unjumble the words or sentences. So the teacher provides a list of words which are jumbled. The teacher reads the words. The students write them by unjumbling the letters in their worksheet. So we've got, for example, in number 1, Schwester meine nie sieht Nachrichten die. And the teacher would obviously read, meine Schwester sieht nie die Nachrichten. And they would just need to put those in the correct order. So again, it's quite supported. You might even want to do something like that in the early stages of dictation. So there's still a level of support, but obviously in the real exam, we need to be conscious of the fact that the children will just hear it 3 times, and then obviously they won't have any support at all. So we need to get them to a point where they can confidently do it without that support. High challenge, no support. I'm going to call this a classic dictation. The teacher chooses a short text to read aloud. It could be a model answer for a writing question. So again, that recycling, reusing, look at something that you already have or something that you've already studied recently with your students and revisit it. Pupils unaided, having spent a good chunk of time building their confidence in transcription, so that's really stages 1 to 3, have to listen carefully several times and reconstruct the passage in correct, accurate target language. So for those of you perhaps brought up in your native country with a diet of dictation, I'm thinking about the French amongst us, I don't think that will be too unfamiliar. But obviously, having showed you what the expectation of the exam board is, and actually I haven't shared the mark schemes, but the number of marks allocated to the dictation section of the exam is actually quite minimal. So although we want our students to do well in this task, we want to prepare them well for it, it's not something that we need to be necessarily overly worried about, because even if they don't do an absolutely brilliant job of it, it's not going to hugely detract from their overall marks. Buzzed gap dictation is the next one. So the teacher dictates a sentence or a paragraph to students, which they write, and every so often the teacher presses a buzzer or claps. And when this happens, the students need to write a word that makes sense in the given context to replace the buzz or clap. Now, this is quite nice because it includes an element of creativity. So they are transcribing what you are dictated to them. So it's obviously helping them towards building those exam skills. But in the buzz section, it also helps you to identify whether they understand the context and whether they can actually think of a word from their memorized vocabulary that would actually make sense in the context. So we might have, for example, me gusta salir, booze, porque, booze, and they've got to think about what might go in the gap. Finish the sentence dictation is next. So the teacher dictates some unfinished sentences, and students need to finish the sentence with something that makes sense. It's a bit of an extension on what we just previously said. It's great to extend students to write longer sentences. It's what we all want in the writing exam. So it's killing two birds with one stone. So I might start by dictating en mi tiempo libre me gusta, and then I'm going to pause. They write down what they've heard, and then they think about something that they know from memory that they could add to that to make sense. Mistaken dictation. So the teacher dictates some sentences with some deliberate grammatical mistakes, and the students need to spot what the mistake is and correct it. Now, some teachers, and perhaps rightly so, are not keen on presenting their students with things that contain mistakes, and I understand that school of thought. However, it did say clearly in those descriptions from the exam board that we looked at earlier that not only will they be expected to think about the correct spelling of what is being dictated to them, but also the grammatical accuracy. So, for example, if the sentence was Je suis allé en France, the allé would need an accent. I don't think there's any worry about whether it's masculine or feminine, but obviously an understanding of the fact that the past participle always with an ER verb has an EQ accent would mean that if they miss that off, they are not necessarily demonstrating the level of grammatical awareness that is required, if that makes sense. So you've got, for example, en mi tiempo libre me gusta juego al fútbol. And obviously we are hoping that the students recognise that the juego is incorrect and that they are able to not only dictate the sentence correctly, but also change that element of the task. So I am an advocate of using technology, but only when it does a better job of what I want it to do than me just being in the classroom as a teacher. So what we're going to look at is, let me just go forward. So gone ahead too far. Some of you may have heard of the free website TeachVid. So essentially you have a video, often it is a song. So I think the one that I've got on the right hand side there, it looks to be Stromae. And essentially you create a free account and you log on and you decide on a song or a text or one of the activities that are already preloaded. And then if you look to the the left hand side, I can't tell my right from my left today, the left hand side of my screen, you've got a number of activities that you can play in line with the video. So essentially you would watch the video and then you can choose from a multi-choice gap fill. You can choose word blocks, you can choose a full gap fill, you can choose a gap spell, and often like the screen at the bottom left, that might do what I just said earlier, and it might just have the missing vowels. So they hear the song, they can stop it, they can pause it, they can rewind it as many times as they like. So it's something you could do on the interactive whiteboard with a whole class. If you've got a set of devices, or if you've got a computer room, you could take a group in there with some headphones and they could do that individually. You could set it as homework. There are lots and lots of ways in which TeachVid can be used. If you look to the right hand side, rather than just missing letters. You play the same clip, but it's actually deleted full words. So again, that's a little bit like what I demonstrated with the edXL foundation level dictation exercises. They give you a little bit of context in the form of a couple of words, and then the students have got to fill in the rest according to what they hear. So what I'm going to suggest, Elaine, if people are in a position to switch screens, is to just do a quick search online for TeachVid. And I'm just going to check on my computer, not on my computer, on my phone, if it is TeachVid. I think it's teachvid.com. Have a little look on there, because you may be more likely to use this again if you've had a little play today. And there's a button at the top that says Get Started. So it tells you it's used in 50 countries, trusted by more than 100,000 teachers. No, 10,000 teachers. And it's free to use for teachers and students. We always like things that are free. So click on the Get Started button, and then what it will allow you to do is register for an account. You can do that either with Google, or if you've already got an account, then you can obviously do that in a matter of seconds. And then if you go to the section that says resources, even without creating an account, if you don't want to do that just now, you can have a little look at some things that have been uploaded. So I'm looking on here now. There is a song by Juan Gabriel called No Tengo Dinero. You've got a song by Kids United. I've used this a couple of times. On écrit sur les murs. So you've got a number of different things. You can search by language. You can search whether you want a first language translation or not, what level your students are, different categories. So is it advertising, entertainment, music, poetry, song? So there's not just music videos, there's a whole range of things. And then obviously the subjects. So the subjects that are offered are language, maths, science, geography, history, sport, and other. So it's not just for languages, apparently. That's new to me. I didn't realize that. So yeah, have a little look at that just for a couple of minutes and see if that might be something that you could use either in an IT lesson, or as a quick start, or as a whole class activity. Or like I said, I might be more inclined to set this as a homework, because we've just gone, or we're moving away from weekly vocabulary tests. We think that there is a place for vocab tests. We think that languages is something that you need to learn week in, week out. It's not just something, it's kind of accumulation of learning. It's not just something you can do at the end of the school year. But we were finding that actually sometimes the children were not necessarily spending the right amount of time on their learning homework. So to mix up and to make things a bit more creative, we are going to be doing every other week as a vocabulary test. And then the interim activities are going to be things more like the dictation. We're going to try and incorporate some cultural activities just to increase the amount of cultural capital that our students have. So a little bit of a switch up, still, showing that there is an importance in language, in learning our languages and giving students a list of phrases or words to memorize. And sometimes that can be French to English, sometimes it can be English to French. We tend to mix it up. With our lower ability classes, I sometimes give what I call a gold, silver, bronze test, where they get to choose whether they circle the correct answer from a choice of answers on a bronze test, where they perhaps get the first letter or a couple of vowels to help them on a silver test, and then gold, which is what you and I would regularly set as a vocab test, where they get the English words and they've got to try and write them down in the target language. So again, a number of different ways of stretching children depending on their ability and inclination for languages. Another app and website that I've come across recently, and I can't say that I've used it in my lessons, but when I was researching the resources around dictation, this definitely stood out as looking like it had potential. This is called SpeechLink. So if you have a mobile device, you can find the app. I think it's for both iPhone and Android. And there is also a website, speechlink.com. Interestingly, they have an audio dictionary, which I think has got potential with the new GCSE. And you can see it says browse through thousands of common sentences with audio examples from professional voice actors. And you've got a whole range of languages there, from Spanish to French to Japanese, Korean, Chinese. We teach a little bit of Chinese in my school, Italian, Portuguese, German, and Russian. It's always nice to see German there. And then on the left, you can see it says thousands of sentences available for dictation from beginner to advanced, forever free. and again, a whole host of languages. So that's definitely worth a little look. It isn't a school-specific resource, so again, it might take a little bit of filtering through what you would like to use and what you wouldn't like to use. But I think perhaps for your more able students, the ones who go away and do extra Duolingo and Languagenut, it might be just another one to add to your list of, these are your enhanced, what do we call it, challenge tasks, or things that you could do to go above and beyond what I'm setting as a kind of standard homework for the whole class. I'm going to move on to something a bit more fun now. So this is Snapchat dictation. So I'm going to show you a little video which tells you how to make yourself into a Disney Pixar cartoon character. Now, the video that I'm going to show you after the introduction is not actually myself, it's Esmeralda. So I don't look like the Disney character on the right hand side. That's not me. Although if I do manage to find a spare minute, I think I'd quite like to see myself as a Disney princess. So I'm just going to show you in a second how to create the character. And just as an introduction to this, the reason for it is, again, we tend to use since COVID a lot more online platforms for language learning. So it's opened up the scope of what we can set for homework. So on Google Classroom, for example, if you want to set dictation for homework, you can just add a voice note and that would be absolutely fine. But I think to make it just a little bit more engaging and perhaps a bit more pupil friendly, perhaps with your lower age children, it might be that you want to record yourself with a Snapchat filter, like the ones that I'm going to show you, and record a short dictation. And again, I'm going to show you the one that Esmeralda shared with her class. And then they simply, for homework, have got to listen to that as many times as they like, and they're going to try and transcribe what they have heard. So let me just click on that to begin with. We had a practice earlier, so I'm hoping that the sound is okay. Is it going to allow?
Hey everyone, Haley from Biteable here. Today I'm going to teach you how to get the Disney Pixar cartoon character filter on your phone so you can participate in the TikTok trend. Let's get into it. So we're going to start off by opening up Snapchat on our phone, and from there you're going to click this smiley face beside the record button. I already have the filter installed, but if you don't, head over to the Explore tab and then search for the filter Cartoon 3D Style. It'll also come up under Trending Lenses, but if it doesn't, just search for Cartoon and then click Cartoon 3D Style. Then once the filter's applied, go ahead and hold down the record button and film your video. And once you're done recording, just save it to your device. From there, head over to TikTok and upload, and then select the video that you want to upload. After you click next, you'll be able to choose from the sounds and do any of the TikTok editing that you want to do before you either upload it to your TikTok or save it as a draft.
So we're back to the main screen. So that tells you about, you wouldn't necessarily share it on TikTok with your students unless, of course, your department or school has a TikTok account. I think the way that Esmeralda has managed to share that is on a private YouTube channel. So she would just share the link to the students. So let me just show you a little clip of what she has done.
A mi novio el año pasado cuando estaba de vacaciones en España. Ese día estaba muy contenta porque había ganado una competición de piragüismo y estaba relajada tomando el sol en la playa.
I'm going to pause there. Now, when I first showed this, I said to Esmeralda, gosh, it's 45 seconds. That's quite a long translation, but she did say that it was quite a bright and able group. So you could just make a really, really simple and short video. It also reminded me, and this is Joe on the call, many moons ago, there was an obsession with the Voki, V-O-K-I, the Voki website. And again, I can imagine a resurgence of that, to just record very short, snappy dictation activities where I'm just going to pretend that I'm a lion or whatever character they have these days on Voki. And I'm going to record my voice or use one of the automated voices. Some of the robotic voices are actually quite good quality. And then I'm going to save that and share it on some sort of online platform. And then again, the homework would just simply be to listen to a couple of those short recordings and write down in accurate French, German, Spanish what you hear. Green Pal Dictation, there's a link there that you might want to explore. That's another one of Esmeralda's wheelofnames.com. And then again in lockdown, quite a number of teachers exploited the Flippity app. So this is one where Esmeralda has suggested that you might use a combination of Flippity and Vocaloo, where basically you are recording your dictation. So a free voice recording tool, Vocaloo. It's one that I often get my students to use to send me voice recordings because they don't need to actually log in. And then Flippity, where you could then create some of the tasks that go with it to just exploit that that dictation in a bit more detail. So top tips: work on pupils' phonic awareness first. I think that has been the kind of driving comment through the whole of this webinar. If the students aren't secure in their sound spelling connections, it's going to make dictation really, really difficult. Not impossible, but it will make it difficult. Build pupils' confidence over time. So as I said, start in Key Stage 3, or if you are in a through school like myself, if you've got the opportunity to start even earlier, then I think it's a good idea. If as a teacher you fear that dictation is boring, you can spice it up with your delivery. So I think I gave you a good few examples of tasks, but you could, for example, use exaggerated intonation, silly voices. I wish I'd brought it with me, actually. I think it's in my colleague's classroom. I've got from eBay, I think it was about £6, a big mouth voice recorder, and it's just battery operated, and you click on it and it turns you into a robot. So I don't know if anybody uses, it must be Dynamo 1. It could actually be Dynamo 2. There is a unit where it talks about a robot who does the chores around the house. And so during that unit, I was inspired to buy this robotic voice changer, and the children took great pleasure in speaking aloud and recording themselves or sort of saying their sentences through this robot voice changer. And it just added a bit of fun and pleasure to the lesson. But again, you might choose to, you might already have something like that in your store cupboard. Use gestures to drop hints and add some fun. So for French, for example, if there is a missing accent, if they've forgotten the accent, or you want to stress that there's an on je suis allé, you might want to do quite exaggerated gestures to stress your point. Deliberately use very slow, very fast, loud, quiet delivery. That works quite well with the earlier years. And do you know what? A bit like I'm going to do in a second with you guys, ask the pupils for their ideas. Sometimes they come up with the best ideas. When you do a task, what happens often in my classes, they'll say, oh, can we do that, miss? But can we do it this way? Or could I be the teacher? Or miss, what if we did it this way? So again, I think there's scope for asking your pupils, once you've got into the swing of introducing a few dictation activities, what would they like to do? So at Suzi Bewell on Twitter, and suzibewell@gmail.com is my best contact address if you want to ask me about anything dictation, or if you just want to keep in touch post webinar, and perhaps if you are teaching French at Excel next year or Spanish, and you're keen on some sort of collaboration and sharing of resources, I think that will save everybody an awful lot of time.
Right, thank you so much for tonight, Suzi. Thank you for everyone who's attended.
I just hope, even if you go with one or two ideas and resources, and if you're feeling a bit less daunted about the prospect of teaching your children dictation skills, then I feel like my job is done.
Yeah, definitely. And if you'd like some more resources or anything that you need from us, just let us know. But also my email address is elaine@languagenut.com. If you want to have a free demo or a trial of our resources, which we also have phonics as well, then please get in touch.
All right.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye now. Bye-bye.